Hey everyone, what's up? I'm Sir Wade, and today I'd like to welcome you to the MSI Industrial Design Challenge. I'll be taking on the challenge today to try and demonstrate the brand spirit of tech meets the aesthetic. I'm going to be designing something powerful, stylish, and that's a game changer, something that I think would be super cool, and I'll be designing it on some MSI hardware. If you'd like to get involved in the challenge, there'll be a link in the description for you to jump in. More on that later. For now, let's see what we're working with. Today I'm going to be working in Maya to mock up my design, and I'll also be animating it. The monitor I'm using is the Prestige PS341WU ultra-wide monitor. It's got perfect color accuracy. It also gives me more than enough room on the screen and resolution to work with whatever files I need to create. And the desktop PC I'll be using is the Prestige P100, a PC designed for content creation in a small form factor, but is very, very stylish and powerful. So I'll show you what we're going to be creating here. I've got Maya open over here. I've got OBS open here, recording my session that way for the video I'm making here. You can actually see what I'm doing a little bit more clearly. But it's good to know that I've got this recording my full 1080 session. I've got lighting, I've got rendering, I've got all this stuff happening, and this PC is handling it like a champ with no issues, recording and working at the same time. Like I said, a powerful content creation PC. So I've decided to create the Ultimate Gamer's Backpack. That way you can have a backpack and your whole PC on the go. I think it would be really cool if you had the ability to simply sit down and have the backpack let you have a seat, bring all your peripherals forward, and give you a gaming monitor inside your visor with headphones that you can simply stand up and go again if you need to be on the move. So this is my creation, the design I decided to create, and I'm going to walk you through how I did it. So I'm going to start off with a cube. This is a really common workflow, and since I'm not a professional modeler, I like to do a little bit more of a brainstorm type of pass. Now since I'm going for a backpack, I definitely want one side to be more flat and the other side to be more rounded. Now one trick I like to use is I'll move my edge loops towards the outer edges. And what that's going to do, when I smooth it, I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard and it will give me a smoother preview of my mesh. And by keeping some of the edge loops towards the edge, I'll get a more defined shape. And the further I have the edge loops towards the middle, the more round the shape around it's going to be. To keep that organic feel, I'm also going to use soft selection. So if I hit B on the keyboard, you can kind of see this colorful preview of, it's sort of like a heat map. And what that allows me to do is grab one or a couple faces, vertices, or edges, and it'll have a fall-off effect. So I can make small adjustments, and I won't need to hit every little vertice to get the vibe that I'm going for. So it'll just gonna help me move faster. I'll also use symmetry in some cases. I'm not using it right now, but I will later on use symmetry to kind of speed this up as well. Now for this backpack, I was thinking the top part, I'm definitely gonna wanna have almost like an area where you could put stuff in it, like a normal backpack. But the bottom, I want it to be a lot more sturdy because this gamer backpack is going to have a seat built into it. And I need somewhere for all that carbon fiber to go. And on top of that, you probably also want to have a nice sturdy base for, venting, cooling, or just, setting it down if you were going to just place it down and game that way. So I want to keep a bottom-heavy approach as I work on this, but I also want it to be something that looks somewhat comfortable. So that's why I'm trying to get these nice smooth edges, and when I bring these corners in and out, you can see that I'm kind of creating these sharp points, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. And so I'll use strips with scaling, rotation, to sort of mitigate that. Now, I'm just going to keep working on this for a little bit, and ultimately, there's no real point where I decide this is done. It's just sort of like, okay, well, it's good enough to move on. And so I'm just playing around, trying things out, and seeing what I like. I don't like to be too strict with myself here, especially since this isn't my main skill. As an animator, we don't have to make a lot of models, really. Like, that's another part of the pipeline. So if you were to work at a studio as an animator, this isn't something you'd usually have to do unless you worked at a small studio, and maybe in that case you might wear a few different hats and you might try some of this stuff out. But overall, these are just a lot of tricks I've learned from other people who do this professionally. One thing I don't use very often is marking menus. Marking menus are the little floating menus if you hold down the spacebar or the right mouse button, and I have seen some people work extremely fast with those. When I was working at DreamWorks, for example, I saw someone who he'd worked in the He worked in the modeling department for years, and he knew the marking menus so well, he would use every single tool from that workflow, and it was just something very different. So, regardless of what you're doing, whether or not this is your skill set or something you're good at, that's what's fun about these challenges, is that you can try a whole bunch of different things, try different workflows, try different skills. You can learn things from other people. These tutorials are great resources and stuff like that. So anyways, once I get the backpack feeling pretty good, I decided it's time to move on to the straps. So that's what I'm doing here. I grabbed a torus, I made it lower poly, because I didn't really need all that smooth resolution. I can smooth it out by hitting 3 on the keyboard as I did before. But first, I'm just going to get a general idea of what I want, but I'm also going to go to the duplicate special menu and create an instance. What that's going to allow me to do is still make changes to the original one on the left, and it will adjust the one on the right. Now, I'm not using symmetry. It's not, one piece of geometry with symmetry. It's an instance, which is like a duplicate, but it's still referencing the original. So any changes I make to the original one, those changes automatically populate over to the duplicated special one over on the side. So I'm going for kind of how a backpack strap would be, where it hangs down a bit lower. Now, I'm starting to like what I'm getting here, so I also figured I should save my file. You should always make sure you don't go too far without saving. And at this point, I realized I should probably get some kind of a mock-up person. So in Maya, you can actually open the content browser, and you can pull in all kinds of stuff. There's all these base meshes and things that you can use for reference, for sculpting, for whatever you want. So I pulled in this base humanoid and thought, all right, let me just make sure that this is approximately the right size. And then I realized, you know what? This guy's cool, but I'd rather have an actual rig, one that I can actually move and pose into place. It'd make my life a lot easier for this. So I'll go back to the content browser, and there's actually some built-in rigs here with some very corporate and stock footage looking people. But this is going to work perfectly because, as you can see, they're actually rigged, and you can do whatever you want to do to kind of mock up a design like this. So I'll keep the textures off. I don't really need them right now. I'll scale down the whatever this guy's name is. Let's just call him Jeff. I don't know his name, and we're going to name him Jeff. So scale Jeff down to an appropriate size. I'm having some kind of weird Maya bug here with my HIK interface. But this is Maya's HIK, Human IK Auto Rigger. That's what these are generated with, and so that's what I can use as a picker to grab the different parts of my character. So I'll think, okay, if I had someone sitting and gaming, what position would I have them in? So I'll just kind of rough that out. I won't spend a whole lot of time making it perfect. I'll just get a general idea of, okay, it'd look probably like that. We don't want to be too hunched over. We want to have decent posture, so I won't push that too far. So I'll put them approximately where I think it would make sense and figure out, all right, how big exactly is my backpack? So I'll make a few display layers just so I don't accidentally select that geometry and so I can see through. That will allow me to grab my backpack shoulder straps and make some adjustments because my original positioning wasn't really great for where they're ultimately going to be on this guy. Now, if I were using something like ZBrush, I could get some, perfect folds and exact measurements of how things are going to be and get all the fabric details, but I don't really need all that. For this design challenge, I just wanted to kind of rough out the general idea of what I want. I don't need it to be perfect. I just wanted to communicate the idea so that someone much smarter than me can put it into, CAD or whatever software you would actually do to manufacture something like this. For me, this is all about the idea. So I like to isolate some things I work on, and that can be done with Control-1 on your keyboard or Command-1 if you're on a Mac. And that will help you to just see only the objects that are selected. Now, here I'm trying some different deformations, which are not really working for me. But I was trying to make the straps a little bit thicker in some areas, but I was having a hard time getting that to work with my instance situation. So I figured, let's just try something else. I'll just give them more of a belt. So I duplicated that mesh from the strap and just started using my soft selection to rough out a belt. Now again, I don't want this to be perfect. One thing that's really important as you're modeling things like this is you don't want things to be absolutely perfect. You don't want super smooth edges. You don't want super perfect curves. Don't leave things just as an exact circle because, to keep things organic, you want to have a little bit of imperfection. It really helps to sell the realism. Now here, on the other hand, I'm just going for rough shapes. This is almost the exact opposite. Because I want the keyboard and mouse panels that he can put his hands on to be somewhere around here, in this case, I'm not going to spend a lot of time putting in a lot of detail with the models. I don't want to make them perfect or imperfect. I just want to generally block out big shapes because I can always adjust stuff later, but for now I want to keep things simple and move quickly. So that feels pretty good for the keyboard and mouse. I want them as two separate pieces, and now I'll start to think about, all right, what is the actual construction of this going to be? How's it work? Maybe I'll have some kind of a lever that will move down. And so I'll move my pivot points in Maya. You can move the actual pivot points of your geometry, which is the point from which any particular object pivots from, rotates from, and that's if you hold down the D key, D as in dog. That will allow you to move the origin. And I'll be doing that here and there as we go. But right now I'm just thinking, okay, where exactly do I want this to be? What's the perfect ergonomic height? Because my design here, I want to make sure that while it's stylish and powerful, it's also comfortable. And so arms at a nice 90-degree angle give you a nice ergonomic place for these, for this little hand rest to be. And I'm thinking, all right, there's me moving the pivot point. We'll use D for that. And I'm just gonna move this over here and think, okay, this is sort of a rotating swivel arm, and I'm gonna create these sort of beveled metal. And I'm just gonna use other cylinders for this. I don't need it to be perfect again. So I'll just make these different sections to make it seem like it's connecting properly. So now it's time to think about the sort of the undercarriage, I suppose, or the mechanic, what would you call it? The machinery, I suppose, of how this actually works. And I spent some time really thinking about, how do I want this to function? If this were a real piece of gear, which I'd like it to be, how would it work? How would it move? How would things rotate and fit into place so that you don't smack yourself in the head with the keyboard, and so things aren't, in danger of being broken? So for here, I'll take a torus. I'll, again, make it lower res so I can get a nice, good edge on the left and right. I want to have vertical lines there. And I'm just going to try and make this into sort of a U-bend beam. What I'm trying to do here is create a support for the bottom of the keyboard. Now, it doesn't need to be perfect again, but I do want it to feel, good. I want it to feel realistic. So I'm going to try and bend this into a stronger shape that would actually be able to support the weight of the keyboard. Because if you're going to have your hands resting on a keyboard and a mouse, you want to make sure it doesn't break. So I'll make it this kind of pointy thing, and then I'll just smooth it to see how that's going to look, because I ultimately want this to be a nice smooth metal beam. Now, I tried some stuff here to remesh it, but ultimately I just ended up grabbing these bottom caps and remeshing those, and it works good enough for me to then hide it inside other cylinders. So I'll go ahead and unhide my geometry when I'm done with that and move it to where I want it to be. Now I have to freeze and reset some of my transformations fairly often, because when I move things around, sometimes the axis gets all messed up. So I'll move that into position, adjust the scale, and try to make it feel appropriate and maybe a little thinner. That way it's not as in the way. So this part, I actually found to be a lot of fun. I was having some issues here with the duplications and things like that, which I'll keep running into, but here I was just thinking, okay, how do I have a nice, sturdy sort of framework for this to move with? I want to make sure things are supported on both sides. I want to make sure that there's no hard edges that you would scratch yourself on if this were real. You want to have nice kind of rubber caps or, metal sockets for everything to plug into nicely. And so that's what I'm working on here, just trying to make it feel real, that little extra detail to give it the extra thought, to show that, yeah, I actually would like this to be a rubber cap. That way you don't have, open metal or, a hard edge to cut yourself on. So that's feeling pretty good. And what I think I'd like to do is copy this general idea and bring it over here to the mouse side. Now, what I'd like to do is probably use that as almost like the mechanism that the mouse extends from. I want the keyboard and the mouse side to behave differently. The keyboard side, I think I want it to fold up and nestle on the side of the backpack because it's big and it can't really retract anywhere. But the mouse I think could retract into itself. So this is almost like a telescoping trumpet arm in a way. If you think of a trumpet or any kind of a telescope or something, that's what I'm envisioning here. So a lot of these different little sockets to collapse into each other. And then ultimately this little shelf here where it comes from, I think I wanted to pull back up against the backpack. This was actually a lot of fun to try and figure out, how would this really work? What would make sense? And, an engineer would probably look at my design and say, you're crazy, this would never work. I don't care. It's 3D, it's fun, it's a challenge, and this is what I like, I just want to give it a shot. And so here I was just thinking, well, we'll probably still have the telescoping arm, and I don't know exactly how I want that to work. So I'm going to go ahead and move my pivot again along the axes of these other poles I've created, and that'll allow me to have an easier time scaling these. You can see I can just scale along that vector, and it'll let me move and scale them much quicker than having to reposition them in world space. So I'll create those telescoping arm stuff, and for some reason, whenever I duplicate these, it gives me such weird issues, so I just do them one at a time after a certain point. Now, I'll deal with all the parenting hierarchy stuff later. I'm not thinking about animation right now. I'm just roughing out the general model. Now, here's one thing I was thinking is that I don't want this gap. If you have your mouse and your keyboard, you don't want stuff falling through the cracks. So I'm just going to create this little rubber seal. Now, it doesn't have to be rubber, I mean, whatever it is. I'm imagining that this is something that can retract and, it'll connect once these pieces are together. And speaking of, I'd like maybe something to secure these sections together. So I'll create these little bolts, these little, we'll call them carbon fiber locking mechanisms. That way, when these two pieces get close to each other, the keyboard and the mouse, you can just have it magnetize and then they'll stay stable because you don't want them wobbling around. And since the keyboard's not supported on that far side, we want something to link it up. Now I'll work on the visor, and I'm going to start with another torus. These are very useful. I'm going to make the resolution a little bit lower, not too low though, and then I'm going to try to adjust the feel. I don't want it to feel too Tron-like, but at the same time, I'm not entirely sure what kind of a visor we go for. I'm not looking for VR goggles as much as I'm looking for, what this is supposed to be is a monitor. This is an MSI monitor, but in the form of a visor. And so I want something simple, something to give you that feeling of an ultra-wide monitor with great color accuracy and so on. And I want it to feel in a compact package that comfortably rests on your head. I also want a spot for the ear holes because you should have the choice to use your own headphones in something like this. That's something that I really like about certain VR headsets is that you can use your own headphones. And so I want that to be a feature that you'd be able to use on this device. So I will turn on the symmetry. I'll pull up the ear section. I gotta fix a little bit of this geometry, but you can see that any change I make on one side is automatically being populated to the other. And then I'll just scale this back, and there we go. Now I don't really like how thick that back section is looking behind the ears, so once I finish with this, I'll probably bring this section up just to have it feel a little bit different. So I'll give this an interesting shape, and that feels pretty good. If I smooth it out, it's somewhat interesting. I'll probably adjust this visor so that we get a nice field of view. We want to make sure we don't lose anything here. We definitely want to be able to see as much as possible. There we go. So I'm liking the way that feels. I'm imagining that you're playing Apex Legends or, whatever game you might be playing. You could be designing something creative on the go. You could be gaming, whatever it is. The idea here is that, this will be something you can comfortably use anywhere. And speaking of comfort, let's work on the seat. Now, I was thinking here maybe having some kind of, rounded, almost like a ball head tripod would be kind of cool. But then I realized that, that's a little high up. Like, where would the support be? So, you know what? We need a seat. We need a place to sit, and we actually need it probably to be level with the bottom of the backpack, because otherwise there's no real stability here. We want the backpack to be supported. So let's go ahead and grab these bottom faces, and we'll just pull them down. And I realized actually we should probably grab this whole section because we want to grab all the edge loops involved in this. So we'll just bring this lower, and that's a lot of area without any edge loops. So let's bring that one down too. So now we have a little bit more of a jetpack looking thing. It's definitely bigger than I initially thought, but then, we're going to have a whole gaming PC inside of here. You got to have room for all the stuff, the power supply, the cooling. You want everything cushioned and stable, so that's fine. So here I'm going to work on this seat. I'm going to try and scale this back to make more of a seat cushion type shape. And once I have that, I'm just thinking, all right, well, we want this to be a comfortable seat. We want this to be something that's pleasant to sit on for a couple of hours at a time. With our great battery life, we've got all that room for a good battery. So let's get a nice seat. Now again, I'm realizing, we gotta go a little lower just to make sure that actually has somewhere to go, because we want this seat to retract back into the backpack, ultimately. Almost like a toaster or something. We want it to basically have the seat be able to pop out, pop in. So I'm gonna give it a little bit more division to round it out, because we don't want it to be something sharp that you hurt your leg on as it's there. And it's looking pretty good. I'm going to move this seat down a little bit, give this a little bit better. Let's use that soft selection, pull this up, hide that. Great. So now I think we need kind of the cutout. Like, where is this going to go? We want to make sure it actually has somewhere to go inside of the bag. So I'm going to start working on some edge loops. I want to make a hole that I can sort of cut into this backpack to give this a slot. Now I'm going to use the extrude tool to kind of cut back into it. But I've got to think a little bit about how I want to cut this up. I don't want it to be too big of a hole, but I also don't want it to be something that structurally weakens the bag. So I'm going to add more edge loops around the edges to try. This is a bit hard for me to figure out just because, it's sort of a trial by fire. You figure it out as you go. I'm not great at planning this section. So I'm just going to make sure I don't have any sections that are without edge loops. I also want to bring this back further so there's actually room for the full seat to move back. And I don't want any weird geometry penetration, so I'm going to make sure I don't have any of that. So I'll just add some edge loops. I'll see what works and add enough structure, not too much structure that this feels like a really strong square, but I want it to feel, I don't want it to feel weak, but I don't want it to feel too rigid either. Same thing with the seat. So I'm actually going to start to bring some of these corners in just to soften it a bit, because I want this to be something that's inviting. I want it to look comfortable. And so I don't want these sharp edges. So I'll bring this in on the sides. I'm also going to do the same thing, I think, over here on the front. We'll go ahead and kind of bring that front bit back just to give it that softer edge. And a little bit here, maybe not too much. So that is my sort of pop-out seat section. Now, I don't think it's going to make sense for the legs to be actually on the backpack itself, because then you'd probably break off the seat, all that weight not supported. So I think what we're going to need to do, speaking of not supported, I think we're going to need to add some supports. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this whole thing that I've created, and I'm going to do a little bit of parenting just to make my life a little easier. And then I'm going to rotate this. I'm going to scale it. I'm just going to try testing this out. Is this where I want it? I want it off-center from the other one because I want it to go vertical. I want it to be able to track with this and have almost a sliding mechanism that it can be the dual support. So it can't be directly under. So I'll have it be this, I thought for a moment that I might make this some kind of lever to activate all this, but then you just have this big lever on your backpack. So let's make a telescoping arm again. Let's go ahead and make some sort of a ball bearing type thing to connect these arms to each other. There's actually a great trick in Maya if you go to modify, it's called match transformation. So if you make a new piece of geometry and you want to bring it to where another piece of geometry is, you can match the transformations with that little menu option. If you're familiar with Animbot, it's a script for Maya for animators that has that as well. But if you don't have Animbot, match transformations is a great little Maya feature that not a lot of people know it's there. So I'm going to go ahead and just play with this. I'm not entirely sure what I'm looking for. I don't want it to be a sphere, but I don't want it to be a ring. I want it to be sort of like a welded circle with a divot in the middle. So I'm going to work on that, get sort of that shape. And I'm imagining that this is something that can rotate with that arm connected to it, like so. And then what I'd like to do, actually, I've got to make sure this lines up. What I'd like to do is I'd like to imagine that this can slide up and down the top arm, because as the entire keyboard thing moves up, that little circle ball thing is going to need to move down that arm to maintain the connection with this other support beam. So I'm just going to create some makeshift rails for this to follow. I don't need a full cube at the bottom, but if it pokes out the side of the cylinder, it'll kind of look like a little track that it can move down. So I'm going to just adjust this so it feels like there's a little rail system for it to kind of glide on. That feels pretty good. Again, I'll deal with parenting, all that stuff later. I also should be naming things that make life a lot easier later on, but I'm not going to deal with that. It's fine. We get the idea. So now back to the seat, I think. What I'll do, instead of a swivel head, I think what I'll do is try to create almost like a little magnetic plate. Something that can retract and move down. So I'll go ahead and smooth that, see how it feels. Maybe add some extra divisions to give it some structure. I want it to feel like this little base. So you've got the comfy chair, and you have this strong base that you're going to be sitting on top of. And I'm going to create these telescoping legs that go below. Now, I'm thinking kind of like a tripod. So I'm going to move the pivot point up, and I'm going to try and match the transformations so that it's right there in the middle. And I'm going to adjust it to be at an angle. So I'll grab this bottom face and just tilt it so that it actually sits flat. And there are probably a lot of better ways than I just did, because now I have this weird rotation thing. I don't really like how that feels, and they're getting all off axis. So I think what I'll do is I'll reset my transformations, and I'll duplicate it 90 degrees for each one. So now I've got this little telescoping thing. Now if I look kind of at the top of this feels a little funny as I try to scale it up and move it. It feels unrealistic at the top section. So I'm going to create a little cap, something for these legs to be attached to. I'm imagining that this could be a magnetic piece that you could actually take the legs off if you wanted to and swap them out with something else. But I want the legs to feel somewhat real, so I'm going to go ahead and adjust them. Let's see if I can get these. I'll just go face mode, I'll bring these in, I'll scale them. And I don't want this kind of mess at the bottom. I don't want this big interconnecting mess of metal to show through, so I'm just going to bring it here That way each leg is independent. And then what I'll do is I'm going to add some edge loops on all the legs inside of the other geometry just so I can hide it. And what that'll allow me to do is just to grab everything up here and chop it off. And that's fine. So now you just have this these nice little legs connected. It doesn't feel all muddled up. And I'll check it from all these different angles just to make sure it feels okay. And what I tried to do here, I was thinking that maybe I would add some telescoping sections. But ultimately, I wasn't able to get it working. I wanted to make sure that all the telescoping sections were consistent and even with each other, and so I created this and then beveled it. But then I thought, you know what, this isn't really going to help my case. It's not going to make my life any easier to telescope it from here. I wouldn't really want to have to move it like a tripod. Tripods are kind of a pain. So then I thought, well, that doesn't look very good. I want something at the bottom more than anything. I want a stronger base more than I want little sockets in the middle. So I'll undo that. And then I tried at the bottom, but there's not a great place to put it, to put extra edge loops consistently on all of them. And so I just kind of went for it. I said, well, let me move it down. Oh, well, that sort of doesn't work because it kind of bends the legs. And, I could adjust it manually, but it's not perfect. And I just don't really want to deal with it. So instead, what I think I'll do is I started grabbing just these, the bottom face caps. Because I thought, well, I could probably just extrude those and then bring them down. And sure, they go straight down, but that's okay. I just want to create little feet. And so you can hold control to have a little bit more control, ironically, over something when you're dragging. You hold shift to make it faster and control to make it slower. So here I just figured, let's try some different things. So I'll grab these different loops. I'll try extruding those. I'll try smoothing stuff. And it just kind of looks weird. It doesn't really make sense to make it any thinner, because then you're just losing integrity. And it doesn't make sense to make it any thicker, because what on earth kind of a shape is that? So I figured, let's try the bottom ones. So I'll try making the bottom ones thicker. I'm like, it's a little bit better if I make it thicker with a little bit more divisions. It does make it feel like they have these sort of feet at the bottom. And I figured, well, that's better than nothing. It's better to have something there than just straight poles, because you want to make sure you have a nice stable base to sit on. I figured that's probably good. Hopefully. We can always maybe make an add-on where you can buy different feet. Who knows? But for now, I think that's a good place to start with the legs. So now I kind of thought about, all right, what's next for me? I think the keyboard should be the next thing I work on. So I actually just went and downloaded actually, not the keyboard, the mouse. That's what it's called. I just went and grabbed a sphere and made the general mouse shape. Mouse shape is not too crazy. It's not the most ergonomic thing, but I thought, it'd be kind of cool if the mouse and the keyboard were built into the table. And so the mouse is actually going to be magnetized to the top, and I'll just duplicate the mouse shape and make sort of a scroll wheel type thing. I could probably just download a mouse and drop it in there, but for now, that'll be good. And now what I figured is, for the keyboard, I actually don't want to model the whole keyboard. I could just do some cubes and get a general idea, but I like the way a keyboard actually looks, with the different key configurations, the space bar, but that's very time consuming. And so I figured, rather than spending the time, let's just go download a quick keyboard and drop it in. So I'm at the transformations, move it over here, and what I'm going to do is just get rid of the sort of outer shell of the keyboard. We don't need all that extra geometry. We only need the keys, because the keys are going to be built into our tabletop. So I'll just grab this and clear it out. I'll just isolate it to make sure that's what I want, clear it out, and now we have all the keys. And I can take that geometry, and I have these sort of weird pieces where the lights for caps lock and things like that are. So I figured, well, I'll try to inset them. They're sort of backwards. So, maybe what we could do is we could take these, isolate them, and then maybe we can extrude them or something, just to have them be their own pieces of geometry. And so I'll take these little pieces, I'll extrude them, and most of them work out pretty well, not all of them. And so I'll drag everything here, and I'll drop it down into the keyboard, get those little lights. There are a few things that don't feel great, like this, whatever this was supposed to be, I think the Do Not Disturb nighttime mode. I'm just going to get rid of it. I don't need it. The rest can live on. And I thought at first that it could really sit on top, and that felt pretty good. So I gave it a quick evaluation, said what's missing, what's next, and I thought, I think it's time to add some materials. So I decided to shade with Arnold. You could really use whatever you want here, but I figured, what kind of a color scheme would I like? I like the sort of cool blue, cold steel, gamer vibe. What we should do is get RGB going, but for now, let's just start simple. That can, we can do that in another tutorial, get all the lighting stuff. So for now, I think it'd be cool to do sort of a charcoal black keys. They would show less dirt and stuff, which for a backpack is probably a good idea. And I'll work on this sort of chrome metal color. I want all the little connecting pieces to be a different kind of metal, and so I'll try to grab all the ones I can and give those a little bit of a lighter color. I am trying to name my colors because while I'm not naming my geometry, colors are hard to find, in the hypershade without actually naming them. I have this little rubber seal area. I'm actually just going to give that the same material as my peripherals. And then I'll give the metal color here, the connector color there, and the backpack needs its own color. I like this sort of navy blue look. So I'm going to give this a nice sort of matte navy blue. And I'm also going to adjust sort of the shape because now it's seeming a little pointy for me. So I want to smooth that out a little bit, make sure it stays nice. So I'm going for a nice navy blue, cold, cooler toned look for this, but of course we could make a bunch of different colors and try all kinds of different things. I'm going to make these all blend in since they're going to fold up. I want them to feel part of the backpack. And that's feeling pretty good. I think color-wise, I'll just use this lighter blue as an accent for everything else. I probably should grab these little edge pieces and kind of give those the connector color scheme so that they feel unique to their own parts. And can't forget the visor. So let's go ahead and make the visor its own color because I want this to be a little bit more glossy. It's not quite the same as everything else, so it's similar to the backpack, but not as matte because it is going to be a monitor. We want it to have a little bit more shine to it. Now, I did forget to do the headphones. I just realized. So let's try some different stuff with the headphones. I tried at first using a sphere, but I didn't. I wanted to cut the headphone in half, get a nice kind of poof where the ear would be. So I tried to split this and extrude this, but then I got this weird thing at the top and the bottom and thought it looked ugly. So I got a different shape and just made it a little bit more high resolution, tried some different things. And I saw this kind of strip through the middle. I thought, all right, that could look kind of cool. So I'll make that my headphone ring. And then I'll kind of squish the rest down. And that sort of gives me the headphone bulge. I think that works pretty well. So I'm just going to duplicate that once I get it on the head. So I'll do the one side here and make it feel like it's actually integrated with the headphones. With the visor. I don't want it to feel too separate. So I'll try to make that work and then duplicate range transformations, get it over here. Great. And then, I think the accent color would look cooler for that. I don't want it to be the same visor shininess. So that is feeling pretty good. Now I think what we do is start working on the hierarchy. So I'm going to parent a bunch of stuff together, and what I'm thinking of here is, all right, when I move one thing, what follows it versus, what should each individual piece follow? And so I'll test some stuff out here to say, all right, I want to actually put a point constraint there, or that way, as I move this up, this can slide down, and then this, when it scales, is what attaches to that. That is why I created that. All right, that works. Keep going. And I'm just trying to think, what are the pieces that I actually want to animate? Make sure that the pivots are in the right spot so that when I move things, they move from where they're supposed to move, the right angles, the right orientations. And I'm sort of trying to think ahead here on how I want the overall system to behave. So I'll continue working on that here, and that works pretty well for things like this that I just want to fold easily, but for these other telescoping arms, I have to think a little bit more carefully. How do I really want this to function? And what do I want to animate? I don't really want to have to animate both of them together, so to save time, maybe what I can do is create a locator. If I make a locator and then attach these telescoping arms to that, that'll just give me one object to scale versus have to scale each one independently. So I'll bring that over here. I'll orient it the same way as everything else. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to parent them to it so that I can move the locator as an animation control. And I'm going to adjust the pivot point and some other stuff. That way they kind of retract into the backpack. That's looking pretty good. And I'll deal with the rest later. Now, I wanted to do a little bit more with these legs. I wanted them to retract actually properly up into themselves, but there doesn't seem to be a great way to do it with the way I've done it. So you know what? for this challenge, we're just going to say, cool, it just scales. It's fine. We'll get the general idea. If I needed to make a more advanced version, we could always do that. But for now, I think this kind of gets the idea across. So rather than translating this in, I'm actually going to scale it. I made it sort of the wrong size. So I'm just going to scale everything into itself and cheat this a bit. No one's going to notice. It's fine. We won't tell. It's our little secret. Now I want the visor to kind of come off the face from the back. I also want the headphones to sort of come up like little spaceship doors. So I'm going to figure out how long I want this to be. I'm just going to play through the timeline a little bit and come up with a general idea of how long I want this to take. I'm going to key everything that I think I'm going to animate because I want to start prepping for motion. And so since I have auto key on, I just start keying everything on a frame that I feel would be good. So on this frame, I want everything to be exactly where it is. So I'm going to make sure I key all the individual pieces. And then here I realized, well, you know what? I didn't even think about the telescoping arm. So I got to figure out the best system for this. Because ultimately I want the mouse to retract, but I also want the entire arm to rotate once it connects up to the backpack. What's the best order for that to happen, to where things are going to make the most sense. So here I try a combination of parenting, groups, locators, constraints. I try a bunch of different things, and none of them really feel great, but I like to just give some thought to this up ahead of time. I like to just see, is this going to be something I'm going to spend some time on? Is this going to be difficult? Is this going to be easy? And this is definitely seeming like the hardest constraint section of all, mostly just because I have one piece of geometry that is required to swivel one direction on one locator, but then turn another way on a different locator. And that's not super normal. And so I'm just sort of learning here that this requires a little bit of rigging thoughtfulness. So I want to attach everything to this locator as far as these bars are concerned, because this is where I want to get the telescoping arm from. I want to make sure. I tried with the constraint, it didn't work. And so I figured, I'll just stick everything to a cube. That way I can sort of move everything in with that cube. So I'll pull a cube in, I'll just make it the backpack color so we don't notice it, and we'll just keep going. I'll come back to it when it's time. And for now, just continue keying everything, making sure everything's where it needs to be. I'll make sure my animation curves for the actual character are good as well. And for now, I'm just going to start somewhere in the middle. I don't usually start in the middle of my timeline, but I don't have a great idea yet about what I want to do, so I'm just going to see what happens. Oops, I forgot to attach this. So I'm going to make sure I have this connected properly. So I'm going to do a lot of grouping and parenting and things to make sure that I can still retain individual control over each object for animation. So I'll do some parent constraints to those groups and start adjusting the placement. So I'm thinking, okay, I want this to collapse down this way. Actually, you know what? I want it to move this way. I want it to sort of come down there with the other arm supporting the other side. And I thought maybe instead of showing all the machinery when it's all collapsed, maybe it'd be cooler to show the keyboard. And rather than having the keyboard completely collapse in, because that's weird, maybe I'll just have it get really flat. That way you can still see the keyboard, but there's no dirt or anything that gets caught in the keys. It just retracts into itself. Now I don't want it cutting through his chest like that. That looks a little painful. And so I don't want everything happening all at once. So what I'm going to do is open up my graph editor and just start breaking some stuff apart. I want each action to have its own moment to shine. I want to make sure that everything that happens independently and in sequence, so that it feels like one nice sequential chain of events where this whole thing is like a transformer. I want it to feel intentional, and so I don't want constant motion. I don't want everything moving all the time. And so I'm just going to roughly block out some different stuff, move some of these keyframes so that nothing's interfering. And here I can just have the keyboard tilt up, for example, and I'll also get all of these controls that I don't need out of here. So I'll allow the keyboard to sort of bend up, and then I think I'm going to have the keyboard also overshoot. Every time I have something move, I want it to overshoot just a little bit. That way it feels more organic, doesn't feel so mechanical. Or mechanical is the wrong word. I want it to feel like it has weight. It can feel mechanical, but mechanics with weight. And so every action is going to overshoot and kind of bounce a little bit. Everything. And I'm just going to keep this going. I could probably even use this curve to copy paste, but for now I'm just going to do it manually. So I'll move this up like a flag, like a mailbox, and again, add that little overshoot and bump down. That way we get a little bounce. I don't want too much bouncing, so I'll get rid of that one. There we go. So now, it'll feel like that whole section has weight. And I'll adjust the timing and things like that later. For now, I just want to, block in the overall idea. So then I want the keyboard to sort of slide down the pole. It's a dancer, right? But so I want this to also bring down the support arm. So I'm going to have the keyboard do whatever its motion is going to be. That's the most important thing. And then I want this to move. Then I realize, shoot, those are connected actually. So I'd be kind of careful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the keyboard and I'm actually going to mute the keyboard's translation. And because it's a little hard to see what I'm doing here. And so I'm going to basically try to do them separately. The arm and the keyboard, I don't want them adding on top of each other. So I'll find the keyboard's translate, which is translate Z, is what's moving. So I'll mute that so it's no longer actually doing anything. The information's still there, it's just not active. So then I can have this arm actually control that same motion. I just copy pasted it into place to get it to be here, and I'll just adjust sort of the ratios of motion to be whatever it needs to reflect the proper spacing of this keyboard. And that's feeling pretty good. We need the bounce to feel a little bit more aggressive. So I'm going to go ahead and just add that a bit more. There we go. So now that's feeling pretty good. I want to keep adjusting these sorts of things. And I'm going to be doing this for pretty much every object here. So I'm just going to copy this curve. I'm going to move it, adjust it, and make sure it doesn't go too far. And as this other arm slides down, I don't need it to actually connect. It's supposed to follow that little swivel ball, but we don't care that much. So I'm just going to keep moving that along. We'll cheat this again by scaling it when the time comes. So as this gets to there, we'll just go ahead and scale it, and that's fine. No one's going to notice. So that's feeling pretty good. That whole keyboard section is moving the way I want. Just check all these curves to make sure that the timing is working, that the splines are where I want them to be. There we go. That's looking good. Sort of just ease everything so that they feel natural. I also don't want anything moving too quickly. I want it to feel like they move slow enough that they have weight, but fast enough that it still feels like an efficient process, a nice sequence, chain of events, like I said before. I also want the keys to retract, so I'm going to make sure that happens first, because the keys should retract before anything else so that they don't get caught on anything. So that is feeling pretty good. I actually really like how that's turning out. The keys are kind of fun too. We'll make sure those have a nice little anticipation. So let's do the same thing here. Let's say that somehow our mouse is not maybe inflatable, but sort of has the same magnetic vibe to where it can sort of move down into the panel. Seems like the best way to do things. You could, of course, use your own keyboard with this system, or your own mouse and keyboard or whatever, but I think it'd be cool to have it built in. So I'm going to go ahead and get that feeling here as well. I want it to drag a little bit, so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to have the scale drag a little bit less than the translation. So at that point, now I think it's time to start retracting all the telescoping arms. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this little control cube that I made. I'm going to push it out for an anticipation. I'm going to pull it in, and I realize now that they don't actually line up. So I'll go ahead and pull this in just to make sure everything's working. That way it all lines up properly. And I'll also get rid of all the extra animation curves I don't need. It'll make my file go a little faster and my life a little easier. And I don't want these to go too far away from each other, so let's adjust the ratios here. So I want the keyboard to flip up in a way. I want the mouse to retract back. I want them to feel different from each other. So I'll go ahead and get all that working. And then, once that's feeling good, I think the next step is going to be to figure out this whole rotation system. Now, I want the arms to retract. That part's easy. I want this to flip up, and that part's mostly easy, except that this is sort of cutting the mouse panel. We're going to have some trouble here. That whole constraint system I mentioned before, it's rotating from a weird spot. What I tried to do at first is turn off some of the constraints, try to adjust some of the pivot points, and it's just not really doing what I want. So I think what I'm going to work on is just do sort of a grouping technique, because grouping usually keeps the rest of everything the same. So actually I'm just going to make sure that when this retracts, it's just going to cheat. It's going to retract down into there for a little bit of an easier time dealing with this animation. Again, we're not going to tell anybody. No one needs to know. So this whole mouse section has been kind of a pain. And really the goal is just get it working as close as I can and move on. So I'm just deleting curves, same stuff, and trying to figure out the best way to make this work. Now at this point it's starting to get close, luckily, where it's starting to fold up nicely. I've got my nice little locator control that I have here, and I can just pull that up, and that's starting to work. I almost forgot these little magnetic link thingies that I made. Now at first I tried sort of a parenting thing, but then I realized that for some reason broke everything. And so this doesn't work great. So instead of doing a parenting thing, I'm just going to individually, you can see here it got kind of weird. So I'm just going to individually, translate or scale or whatever, deal with those separately. So just move them in where they're still visible. I don't like to make things go all the way into the next geometry, because then it feels like they just disappear in a 3D way. I'd rather have it feel like they collapse and they're still somewhat visible. So I'll go ahead and mess with this. Now this is the part that I had spent all that time trying to work out, and that's where my grouping came into play. So I have this collapse up, and then I want it to rotate. So I'll just get rid of this whole constraint thing I had originally planned for, because it didn't really work. And I'm just going to have it swivel up like that. And I again want to have that little overshoot. So now it will collapse. And then I have this one little piece. This I'm just going to cheat again and do this. I'm just going to key the whole thing. So I'll go back to wherever everything is moving. I'll key it to where I want it to be, and then I'll scale and position it. That way it feels like it also retracts. So if you are an animator, you'll see that a lot of this is very janky. But the whole idea with this is just to get a good pre-visualization of how this product would work, how it would operate, and let the engineers handle the real stuff. Now, I want the visor to come up, so I'll start with the ears. We want the ears to come up to let in the sound, break that immersion, and start to reintroduce our user to the real world. So I'll give that a nice ease, a little overshoot there. There we go. A little pop up there. And then the visor, I already have the pivot point towards the back of the head, so I'm just going to do the same thing. When the headphones come up, I want that to rotate up, not too far, and give it that little bit of overshoot. Now, I don't want it to feel too overshooty, because it'll just feel bouncy on his head. I also don't want it to slide so far up his skull that it could fly off. I just want it to get up and out of his way. Now we're just going to imagine that as sort of a Bluetooth connection or something, because I didn't want to deal with a wire, and we don't like wires. This is the design of the future, something that's a game changer, and that would be a wireless screen visor. That's what I'm thinking. So that's all working really well. We've got almost everything working, and now it's just time to deal with the legs. Now, we don't want the legs to just retract under him. We actually want him to step, because we got to make sure he's got to support his weight and stand up. So I thought it'd be cool if we actually animate his feet moving underneath him to take the weight of the character. We don't want the feet to be exactly the same, so we'll adjust the timing so that the feet are a little bit offset from each other. And then we will continue that by grabbing the actual character, and what I'm going to do is work on leaning him forward. I actually realized I need to connect the visor to the head and the backpack to the body, because what I want to have happen is I want to have him stand up. And so actually I got to come in here and adjust some of this parenting stuff, make sure that everything we have here actually does follow the backpack. Because I had only really animated all in place, and hidden geometry inside itself didn't really matter until now. We want to make sure that it actually does stick together as a unit. And so to do that properly, I want to make sure I create all of my parent relationships while the backpack is in kind of its final position. That way they all create the proper hierarchy from a place where they all make sense. If I were to parent them all in a weird spot, they would follow from that weird spot. So I'm going to go ahead and have him sort of lean forward. I'm having a little bit of issue here as I realize that HIK system is a little harder to animate than I expected. I'm also going to examine the textures. I want to see how this really looks with lighting. So I'm going to add some Maya direction lights. I'm going to give a nice little circular base platform for him to stand on. Whenever I'm doing a character standing, sitting, anything like that, I like to see where the shadows are to make sure you can see where the contact points are. And so I'm going to create some lighting. I'm going to make sure that the main key light is the only one that has shadows turned on, which we don't have active right now. But I'm going to make sure the other ones have it turned off. That way they're just lights. They just help to fill the scene. We'll also create an ambient light to make sure there's no super dark areas. And I'm going to come up and turn on lighting shadows. And that will give me actual set shadows for my scene, which I can reorient and reposition. I can also adjust the strength of those shadows or how dark they are from the light in a second, which I'll just do with this slider. Make them really light so they're not too in the way. I'm also going to create sort of this little sphere bubble, give them sort of an environment to sit in. Now, I don't want this to be, like a pod he's stuck in. I just want it to feel like a scene that we're kind of taking a peek into. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse the normals of this sphere so that the object is inverted and it kind of points outside in. And then I need to do backface culling, which will get rid of the backface that we were looking at. And now we can just see through the shape into the kind of inner bubble that he's in. Try to best with the geometry, but I don't want to do that. I'm also going to make this a little bit bigger. I'll group it so it all stays together, move the pivot point, make it bigger so that he's kind of in this environment, and I'll lock that as a reference layer. Now I'm going to give this its own vibe. Now, Arnold actually has a lot of presets, so I can type in like car paint, or I can do like brushed metal, and you can try all these different things. A lot of these seem really aggressive, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick with a lighter feeling here, sort of a blend between chrome and car paint, and that gives me a nice little environment for him to have to stand up in. That's feeling pretty good. Now I'm going to adjust his animation. His arms are feeling very stiff, so I want to go ahead and animate those down. I want to make sure that he actually feels like he is trying to kind of keep his weight forward in this section. So I'm going to have him lean forward. I'll have him look down, so as if he's looking down at where he's stepping. And then I want his head to lead the action as he pulls back up. So I'll have his head kind of pull up, but then level back out as he gets higher up, because I don't want him to feel like his neck's like broken, flopping around. I want him to feel real, like he's actually got a thought process, like he's a real, thinking character in our scene. We want to show the experience that our users would have while taking advantage of this great new hardware. So I'll continue playing with that just to make sure the head doesn't feel floppy or forced. I want it to ease nicely. So that's starting to feel pretty decent, I suppose. Now I want the arms to also help him kind of get his balance, because as he leans forward, we want him to push off and kind of hold his balance. I'm going to get rid of all these extra keys. His arms hold them forward, and he can bring them back as he stabilizes. That's feeling pretty good. His feet are also really far apart, so when he actually plants his feet, I want to plant them closer to where he has a bit more of a base that he can stand on. So they'll start off wide, and then he'll plant them a little bit more together. That way he sort of starts off relaxed, and I'm having kind of a Maya issue here. I did something weird, so I'm just going to go ahead and try some stuff. There we go. That's feeling pretty good. Look at that. And he kind of turns to the side. Yeah. So that is a good way to just kind of use a little bit here and there to get the general vibe, to show us overall, like, this is how the product would work. This is how you could have something that you can sit down, you can game, you can make stuff. And so now, just to play with it, take it one step further, I'm going to adjust some of the settings. I'm going to go to Arnold, set it to GPU rendering. I'm going to turn up the anti-aliasing samples. I'm also going to turn on adaptive sampling. Excuse me. And I'm just going to use a little bit of a higher resolution here. 720 should be fine. And I'm going to turn on the Arnold render viewer. So now I can actually preview what this looks like if it were rendered. And since I did all my materials and he's got his own materials, I can scrub through and I can see what this would look like in motion. And with the power of this PC, this MSI PC that I'm using, it's got an RTX graphics card in there, so it's actually able to give me a nice real-time preview of what this would look like rendered. I actually want to give a nice bright background, so we'll go over to our Arnold tab that's rendering. Let's go to Arnold, add a sky dome, and that'll give us a nice bright background like a product shot. And there we go. So now we can really see what this would look like. And I think I might adjust some of these materials. This is a little light for me, so I think I'll darken the mouse and the keyboard stuff. And actually I can turn, maybe I'll adjust the metalness, try to get that a little bit darker, a little bit shinier. Not too crazy, though we wouldn't want to attract too many fingerprints as we, mess with this keyboard. So try to think of what the actual material would be like that you're using or that you would be experiencing in real life. And what's great is you can make these changes in real time. You can adjust it with the rendering going. And as you notice, I'm actually doing all this while I record in OBS on my computer. So this computer's able to handle this with no problem. The monitor's giving me color accurate results, so I know exactly what it's going to be like when we manufacture this fantastic new gaming backpack. And I can zoom in, I can look around, make sure everything's working right, make sure it all feels good. I'm actually having reflections of those. You see like the legs, the underneath, all that metal stuff. It's actually doing the chrome reflections, and I could adjust that further to get more reflections, to get a more accurate result. But for now, I'm just going to adjust these metal pieces. I actually think I'm going to give them a little bit of a blue tint, because right now they feel very gray, and I want to go with something more in this sort of blue, navy blue color scheme. So let's open this up. Let's tint this a little bit blue, sort of a desaturated blue. There we go. Now it kind of still feels like it belongs in the same color scheme. Like it's intentional, like part of the design. We want that. So that's pretty good. I am liking that. And it's fun. You can even see like the folder with clothes and stuff. Just this basic rig gives us a lot to work with, so we can really start to imagine what this might be for somebody. Size, dimensions, comfort. We can really sort of see how this might work. So I'll turn off the render view. We still have a pretty good preview here with all the lights and everything. And I'll go ahead and adjust this and just sort of admire what we've created. I'm going to play it through a few times just to make sure I don't notice anything weird. And so far, it's looking great. All the little overlaps we've created with the the keys and the way it kind of overshoots each little mechanical piece. It really does feel like those pieces have weight. Now, I didn't do pockets and stuff like that on the backpack, obviously, and, that's mostly because of my modeling skills not being the greatest. We could always go back and add that stuff. We could put more detail into the venting, the cooling, the details of the PC inside. We probably want to have a power button exposed, all that kind of stuff. But for now, I think this is a pretty good, a solid starting point as far as visualizing our design. And now, there's only one thing really left to add at this point. I'm zooming in just to make sure everything's working. I want to really see the keys in action. Yep, that feels good. You can see the locking mechanism. Great. Okay. Now the one thing we can't forget to show us what is powering this new gaming PC backpack. So what we can do is bring in the vector. So what we can do is we can bring in the vector. Maya's got an SVG importer. I'll just bring in the logo. And I think I have it backwards right now, actually. I'm just looking at it from the wrong side. Let's spin it around. 90? Nope. 180 degrees. There we go. So we'll give that a nice, we'll scale that up. And we'll just place that on there. Because we want to show that this PC is powered by MSI. Just like this tutorial. It's powered by MSI and the whole design challenge. So that's feeling pretty good. Let's move that around. There we go. Since I'm imagining the PC sort of towards the bottom and the backpack part up at the top, I think this would be a good place for it. Not too big, not too small. There we go. And there you are. And make sure we just, parent that to the actual backpack when we're ready to go, because we want to make sure that once it moves, it actually follows along. And there you go. We now have a brand new gaming backpack, the next generation of mobile gaming. I don't think you're going to be taking that on an airplane with you, but, could be a very cool portable way to have some power for work, for fun, whatever you need. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I am not an industrial designer, I'm an animator, but sometimes those skill sets overlap and you make do, you use the skills that you have, and you create something fun. So if you'd like to participate, there is a link down in the description where you can submit some ideas. So think about how you would design a PC, a monitor, any peripheral. What kind of features would you put in it? What could you do if you could design anything? So submit some ideas, have some fun, try for your chance to win the Alessandra M and MSI Corkscrew. As always, thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.